All right, guys. We're gonna now switch to the second talk of today, which will be by Dr. Axel Rauschmayer. He wrote a book at O'Reilly for speaking JavaScript, and he will tell us now a little bit more about the upcoming ECMAScript 6. Enjoy the talk.
Hello. So the title of my talk is ECMAScript 6, What is Next for JavaScript? And if you look at how JavaScript is used at the moment, it's pretty astonishing where it appears. So it's used on devices, it's used in browsers, it's used on the server. So basically it's used for much, much more than it was ever conceived for. And the plan for ECMAScript 6 is to make JavaScript better for those tasks. In this talk, I'll quickly describe the goals for ECMAScript 6. I'll describe the design process. I'll mention its features. And I will also go into ways in which you can already use it today. First, a little background. And there are several terms related to ECMAScript 6 that you should be aware of in order to understand what is being talked about. One of those terms is TC39. Who of you have heard that word before? All right. So that's those are, well, in a way, the people who evolve JavaScript. And the members of, and TC means technical committee, the members of TC39 are companies. And the cool thing is that you have all the major browser vendors in it. So there is Mozilla, Microsoft, Google, Opera, and several others. And so these companies, normally they're competitors, but in TC39 they're working together for the good of the language, which is cool. And the meetings are attended, obviously not by companies, but by employees sent by the companies and also by invited experts. So it's not all committee members. There are often people who have knowledge about a given feature. They're invited and they participate in the discussions. And there's a difference between ECMAScript and JavaScript that is also important. So whenever you talk about the language, obviously JavaScript is the word that everybody uses, and that makes sense. But when it comes to the standard and to actual versions of JavaScript, the term ECMAScript is better, and that term is actually only used because there was, a long time ago, Sun had a trademark for Java, which is why companies such as Microsoft don't call their version of JavaScript, they call it JScript, officially. Well, when they talk about it, and it's obviously still JavaScript, but for trademark reasons, they can't officially call it JavaScript. And that's why the standard is called ECMAScript, where ECMA is the organization that manages the standard. And ECMAScript Harmony is something you sometimes may hear when it comes to upcoming versions of JavaScript, and that basically means versions 6 and 7 of ECMAScript. So still the future and soon the present. The goals for ECMAScript 6 are stated in the official wiki for ECMAScript and its future. And there's several goals. 3 I find interesting is that TC39 wants to make JavaScript better for complex applications, because we now have JavaScript applications with, I think, probably a million lines of code. And for libraries, again, a lot of libraries, and they want to make JavaScript a better target for code generators. So more and more languages are compiled to JavaScript, and to support that well is one of the goals for ECMAScript 6. But obviously, it's still a really, really nice language to code in yourself. So sometimes you hear people say, well, the future is going to be some other language than JavaScript. That's something I don't fully believe, because ECMAScript 6 is really compelling, and it's a really nice language, so you'll probably want to use it directly instead of compiling to it. So when you hear committee, technical committee 39, there is a certain worry that the language is designed by committee. And in order to prevent that, new features are designed by so-called champions. And that's either one person or two people. And with those people, like to get design right, it's better to have, I think, one at most two people who have the taste and who actually create the design. Obviously, those people will want feedback from other people, and they get it from the community and from TC39. Afterwards, a new feature is actually field tested. There are, at the very least, one implementation of the feature, and then you can try out in the real world how the feature works. And if it works well, if it doesn't work well, you can refine it. And if it works well, then it's ready for standardization, but not before. So this kind of trying it out in the real world, that's an important step of the process to create a new feature. And TC39 does have the final word on whether and when to include the feature. And okay, let me start the countdown real quick. When it comes to upgrading a web language, you have challenges that are different from normal languages, because an upgrade of the JavaScript engine is always a forced upgrade. So a new version comes out, the engine or the browser does an automatic upgrade, and all of a sudden, all the code on the web has to run on the new engine. And you, as an app author, you can control what version you run on. And the same thing if you kind of figure out what the new engine looks like, then you still have to be able to run all the old code on the web, which is a problem. So one thing you often hear, because people would like to really clean up JavaScript and really remove all the ugly, nasty stuff. And a sentence you often hear is, don't break the web. So the plan for evolution for JavaScript is more to grow out of the problems, to like always move forward and away from the problems, and to solve problems by creating new features instead of removing the old features. And that, for someone who may even have studied informatics, that's like terrible, because we usually, if you're a programmer, you want to clean up stuff, you want to refactor. But actually it works fairly well, and there are a few examples of new versions more or less breaking compatibility that went wrong. And one example, I think, is Flash, where they now have 3 engines, where they always have to deliver 3 separate engines now in order to support the different versions of Flash. And with Python, they also have a lot of problems, because they migrated from Python 2 to Python 3, and Python 3 does have some nice cleanups, but those cleanups break existing code, and now you can't have a mixed code base. So if you have a large code base, you have to switch it over to the new language all at once, and that can be a problem. So that's why ECMAScript 6 is completely backwards compatible. Let's look at variables and scoping. So function scoping is one of the weird parts of JavaScript, and thankfully you will have, and so for example, let's look at an example. If you have temp in here, in other C-like languages, you'd expect temp to be local to this block. And if you do, if you try to output its value or check it against, if it's equal to another value, that shouldn't work. You should actually, you'd expect from other languages such as C, well, Java, C++, C#, you'd expect to get an error if you use temp down here. And thankfully, ECMAScript 6 has let, which kind of is the new var, and here you get block scoping, finally. So that's really nice. Then you have Destructuring, and what that allows you is whenever you want to get two property values at the same time, you can do so by using a pattern on the left-hand side of the assignment. So normally if you want to get the values of first and last, you'd have two assignments, and here it's just a single assignment, and with this pattern you get the value of first into F and you get the value of last into L. And there is a shorthand that you can use that is sometimes convenient as well. So if there's no colon in here in one of the property definitions, then it's meant to be in this case x colon x. This is what the x here stands for. And then you can make the destructuring even more compact. You simply mention first and last, and that's how you get the values out of there. And that's a very, well, convenient way of extracting stuff from an object. And this is an application. Here you have a function that finds an element. And when you found, well, or it looks for the first element that matches this kind of Boolean function, this predicate. And once you have found an element, once the predicate says true for the current element, and then you have a problem, because sometimes you are interested in the element itself, sometimes you're interested in the index of the element. And with this kind of coding technique, you get to have both options. You can do both things at the same time. So here I have this array. I'm looking for the first even element, and thanks to the structuring, I get both the element itself, which is 8, and the index, which is 1. I get that at the same time. And additionally, order doesn't matter, because those are names, not positions. So you can swap them. And what's even cooler is if you're only interested in an element, you can simply leave out index. And then you only get the element. And that's a very compact way of, obviously you can use the pattern too if you don't have the structuring, but as a way of returning values, this is very compact as an abbreviation, and as a way to get a value out of it, that's very compact as well. So destructuring works for arrays as well. So if you have x and y in here, you get a and b. And here is where it's cool, because Who of you have used a regular expression via exec? Who of you have done that? Okay, very good. So the problem is exec returns an array with the results, and then you have to like get each of the elements out of the array, and thanks to Destructuring you can do that much more quickly. So you can imagine all would be a separate. First you would assign the result to an intermediate variable, to a temporary variable, and then you would first extract all, then year, then month, then day. And here you can do it all in one go. Okay, let's skip that. Parameter handling is nice as well. Who of you have done that, have done the assign default values via the OR operator? Right. And that's clumsy, and at the moment there's a lot of work you have to do by hand, and ECMAScript 6 helps you with that. So here, if you omit y, you get the value 3 automatically. So if you call func with just a single argument, you get 1 and 3. You get rest parameters as well, which means that the first argument is assigned to arg0, and the remaining arguments are put into the array others, which you can see here. So 0 becomes arg0, and this is others down here. Then you have the spread operator. Who of you have used mathmax? Well, it's a fairly, you don't need it too often. It's more of an theoretical thing. But if you do need to use it, it's a bit weird that it has multiple parameters and it picks the maximum from these parameters, because that is something you can actually do yourself. You don't need the computer for that. And so this is something that even the compiler could determine at compile time. But now you get the spread operator, and that allows you to use an array instead of multiple parameters. And it mostly replaces apply, which is cool because apply is clumsy for many operations, especially if you use just functions and not methods. And it also works for constructors where apply doesn't work. And name parameters are cool. These, there was, who of you know Python? Okay, wow, quite a lot of people, cool. So in many other languages you have named parameters, and because this is a positional parameter, so the value is determined by the position of where the argument appears. And name parameters are nice because you can, if you look at this function call down here, you have the description in there. So A is described as being option 1, B is described as being option 2. And often if you have like lots of numbers, it's a bit strange because say you have a function call and it's f and then 1, 3, 7, 6. And then it's like, okay, what do these arguments actually mean? Is it x and y and something else? Or Booleans are especially bad. False, why, what? And if you have named parameters, you get a description. And it's very easy to omit stuff. So if things are optional with positional parameters, you always have to put in a null or an undefined or something else, a filler, in order to get to the later places. And with name parameters, you simply omit the name because the labeling allows for that. So then the question is, how do you add that to JavaScript? And it turns out that people have been simulating name parameters for quite a long time using object literals. jQuery does that, for example. And the pattern is called the options object, I believe. And what they did for ECMAScript 6 is they simply said that if we allow destructuring for parameters, then we actually don't need to introduce name parameters. And if you see that this is an object literal and this is destructuring, then you don't even need to create an intermediate object. You can't just skip that. So the compiler in the future could conceivably, I don't know if they, but I think they will do it. The compiler could say, well, this is just statically, like directly an object literal that isn't assigned to anything else, and I can directly transport the value a into this variable. So no intermediate object. Arrow functions. So functions are used a lot in JavaScript, especially when it comes to asynchronous code and, say, Node.js or any kind of web request you make in browsers. And they are a lot to type. ECMAScript 6 has a new kind of function that is called arrow function, and everything becomes much more compact. So no return and no function. This is awesome for, say, event handling and for map. Another thing is that who has done that? Who has done that equals this? All right, that sucks. And very often, even really good programmers sometimes trip over that. So you write code, you use this because you want the this of the constructor or the method, but instead you're using the this of the function accidentally. And that still, well, it's a hassle. It's unpleasant. And so what we have here is we add an event listener, and the event listener wants to use the this of the constructor because this is like a real actual function. It's not a method. But it can't use this, unfortunately, and that's why you do this that equals this dance. And in ECMAScript 6, everything is more beautiful, and this is all you have to do. You use an arrow function, and arrow functions don't have their own this. So they don't shadow the this of the surrounding constructor or a method. So this is like a true, real function, not this kind of weird method function hybrid that normal JavaScript functions are. And then you have object literals, and you get a nice compact syntax for methods, and you can, instead of using object create, you can set the prototype of an object via underscore underscore proto underscore underscore, and that is pronounced dunder for double underscore. So it's dunder proto. Yeah. So, and then there are classes, and more or less they're only classes by name, because what they're translated to under the hood is a constructor. And for as long as you don't do inheritance between constructors, classes are nice, but not like tremendously compelling. But as soon as you do inheritance between constructors, which we'll see on the next slides, they become really cool. But this is already not bad, because this is the constructor itself. It becomes kind of like a method of the class. And here you have the traditional pattern for doing constructors. And this is a method of the prototype. and well, it's more compact. I think people coming from other languages won't be as scared when they use JavaScript for the first time. So it's kind of, yeah, it's nice about it. And they read the word class and they're like, oh, that's familiar. But due to the kind of backwards compatibility of classes, basically that's what they are internally, it's now, I recommend even more to use constructors. There's a lot of people who don't like constructors for understandable reasons. But if you look at the future and if you look at what JavaScript engines execute quickly, if you look at performance, constructors are a good choice. And this is subclassing. And now it's awesome because you have super and you simply do an extend here, up here, and that's your construct inheritance. And this is nasty. This is what you have to do in ECMAScript 5. The prototype has to become a prototype P of point.prototype. You don't really have super. You refer to the super class by name, which is a very unprogrammer thing to do. And yeah, this is the super call down here. It's beautiful. So this is much nicer. And if you want to find out what color point inherits from, you kind of dig down into the code. You find it down here, and here you see it right away at the top. Modules. So there are module systems already for JavaScript, and some people say, well, we have module systems. Why do something new? Why break compatibility? And there are two reasons. You get some conveniences if you build modules into the language. That's reason number one. And reason number two is that the module landscape at the moment, unfortunately, is very fragmented. So we have two competing standards. Who of you have heard of AMD? So there's one standard that's very popular in browsers. And then there's another standard, and that is called CommonJS, which is most popularly used in Node.js. And there's fragmentation. You have, and this is unfortunate, you have many package managers, and you have two competing module systems, probably more. So what ECMAScript 6 brings here is a single module standard that hopefully everybody is going to use. And that in and of itself will be great. So this is what the new syntax looks like. It's not like revolutionary different from, say, the CommonJS standard. But it is a bit more concise, that's for sure. So what you do is you code as you always do it. And so this could be just as well in a script tag. And then if it's inside a module, you mark the stuff you want to export via this keyword in front. So I really like that. And then you import it like this. You say, I want to look inside the module and get square out of it. So that is very similar to destructuring. And then you use it. And you also have the option to import everything into an object and to use it in kind of this namespaced way. Additionally, you have the so-called default export, because they looked at code on the web and especially in Node.js, and a very common use case is just a single function or a class or a single class, and then you don't need named exports. And for that, you use the default export, and that is marked via export default, and then you kind of, this value is what the module is. and this function is imported into my func here. And there are no curly braces. For a class, again, export default, and you import this value into my class like this. There are more features. You can rename imports. How module IDs are resolved is configurable. There will be an API for loading modules conditionally. So this is fixed, which helps with performance, and you can, well, statically analyze what's going on. But sometimes you want to load conditionally. Say, depending on what a user inputs, you want to load a module or not. And for that, you have a programmatic API. Then there are template strings, and if you use the shell or bash or Perl or I think Ruby as well, sometimes if you want to insert values into a string, this is kind of a convenient syntax. So many languages have that you just have a kind of an escape symbol, and inside you can put arbitrary expressions, more or less arbitrary code. And what this is turned into is a function call. These are the fixed parts, and these are the flexible dynamic parts. And then you can imagine that library code that implements template handler can treat these specially. So if that's user input, you can escape it. And there could be a template handler to produce HTML. And so here you would have HTML code, and this would be some kind of input. And the input would be escape a template handler. So that's convenient for, apart from just being great for writing normal strings. So you can omit the name in front of it, and then it's just a normal string that you can put stuff into. Even for that, then it's called string interpolation. Even for that, it's convenient. But when it comes to libraries, it's even nicer, and I'll give an example in a minute. So, as I said, if you don't use a handler, then it's just a normal string. And for an error message, I find that quite convenient. So max is put in there, the variable max, and the value that causes problems. Additionally, you get via raw, which is part of the string.raw, it's actually, which is part of the standard library for ECMAScript 6. You get multiple lines in a string, and you get raw strings. And again, if you use a string to define a regular expression, you have to contend with the backslash of the string and the backslash of the regular expression. So sometimes you need 4 backslashes because the regular expression has 2 backslashes and it escapes the backslash. But additionally, you have to escape the backslash for the string. And with raw, that's not a problem. So this is a regular expression library that's called xregexp. And here you use it because this is a backslash within the regular expression. If you use a string for that, then you need to have 2 backslashes down here. And again, you get multiple lines. And the library in itself is already pretty cool and highly recommended, because usually if you look at a regular expression, it's just this very long, I think most of you, who of you know what a regular expression is? Okay, cool. Just in case, don't want to talk about stuff you don't know. Usually if you have a regular expression and it's just a long mess, it looks like one of these swearing things in comics. So whenever Asterix swears, you have like the lots of symbols. And that's what regular expressions are. And with this library, you can actually split it up. And you can even use names for groups. If you want to extract parts, you can give that a name. And then with the out of the match, you get to extract the value that matched for this group. You get to use a name. You can split it up into multiple lines because white space doesn't count. And you can use comments in here. So that's really pretty, and that's well documented, whereas most regular expressions I'm seeing on the web really are nasty. And even my own stuff is like later on, it's like, damn, what was I thinking? So that's why xregexp is nice. And, well, and this is all you need. This is the template strings are all you need to make this library feel more as if it was a part of the language. So now it feels a lot more as if it was built in, as if it was part of the language. So the standard library has grown as well, and one of the most important additions, I think, is map, because at the moment we're kind of abusing objects as maps from string to arbitrary values. And that is sad, because at the moment, if you want your string to be anything else but your keys to be anything else but strings, you can't really do that in JavaScript. And in ECMAScript 6, you have map, and here the key really is an object, and you can set a value for that key. You can get it. You can determine whether the key exists in the map, and so on. Because using objects properly as maps is really tricky. And, well, as I said, you can only use strings as keys. So that'll be really nice to have. Then you have sets. It's similar. And at the moment, if you wanted to have a set of strings, you'd use an object. And this directly gives you a set. A nice application is that if you have an array, you can kind of use it to eliminate duplicates. So you can, the set only has 1, 2, 3, and you can convert this. You can even convert the set back to an array, and then you've eliminated all the duplicates in here. So there are, object assign is nice. It merges this object into this object. And here I'm using it to assign x and y to this in a compact manner. It's similar to _.extend from _JS, which is recommended. You should check it out. It's a nice library. And it extends the relatively Spartan standard library of JavaScript with more stuff. New string methods starts with and ends with is something that I've been missing when it comes to, like, I've done in the past. I've done a lot of Java, and it's amazing how often you want it. Which is, well, obviously you can use a regular expression, but sometimes it's just nice to have a starts with. You get repeat, and you get contains, and more. New array methods. This allows you to find an element, you get the index, and you get the value back via this predicate. And this allows you to find an element, and you get the index. So for searching, that's convenient. Loops and iteration. How much more time do we have? All right. Loops and iteration. You finally get iterators in JavaScript. Who of you have used iterators in other languages? All right, so you can see that it's useful. And the arrays, sets, maps, and so on, these are all becoming iterable. And additionally, you get a new loop that is more that works with iterables. And that is kind of the loop that JavaScript has been missing so far. So you have the for in loop, which I really don't recommend to use. And for of is what for in should always have been. Because here you iterate over the elements of the array. And so this is really convenient. It becomes even more convenient with iterables. So here you have an example of destructuring being used. Array entries returns the pairs of indices and values, and then you get the index and the actual element by destructuring, and you output it, and the first pair is an array with 0 and hello. The second pair has the index 1 and the value world. So that's one example of this is something iterable. And for-of supports it because it's iterable. So you can implement your own data structures and they will work with for-of. Let's skip generators and symbols. Also part of ECMAScript 6 are promises, which help tremendously with asynchronous programming. There's better support for Unicode. There are optimized tail calls. So if the last function call you make inside a function, or if the last thing you do in a function is a function call, that function call is a go-to. And the stack doesn't grow. So you could actually implement loops and stuff via recursion, as you do in many functional languages, and the stack wouldn't grow because it's always a jump. And the timetable. ECMAScript 6 at the moment is basically done. The feature set is frozen. Last minute kind of tweaks are being done now. And I think even that is dying down. Features are increasingly appearing in engines. There's a link at the end of the slides. We can see what's already in engines. The timetable is at the end of 2014. The specification is finished. And in March 2015, the official publication process starts. And in mid-15, it will be formally published. So that means, well, so the takeaway is it's basically done now. And then, and this is really, really cool, you can already use ECMAScript 6 today. And the next version of Ember.js and of AngularJS, they will actually support ECMAScript 6 via compilation. And there are several ways you can get there. There's TypeScript, which is basically ECMAScript 6 plus optional type annotations. And there's Tresor, which is the most popular purely ECMAScript 6 compiler that compiles to ECMAScript 5. And you can run it statically. You can just add it to your build process. And it can be used from Grunt, Gulp, Broccoli, and other build tools. And you can use it dynamically. So you can even compile your ECMAScript 6 code in the browser if you want to. And Tresor can generate 3 kinds of modules. It can generate ES6 modules. It can generate AMD modules and CommonJS modules. Additionally, you have support for current module systems. So for AMD and CommonJS, you have a compiler that just compiles ECMAScript 6 modules that only have the module syntax from ECMAScript 6, and it compiles those to either AMD or CommonJS. Then you have you could say a plugin for Browserify, which is, how to explain it quickly, which compiles Node.js code so that it runs in the browser, which compiles common JS modules so that it runs in the browser. And that means if you use Browserify, you can use NPM. And there's a plugin for Browserify, which means that you can use common JS modules, but also ECMAScript 6 modules. You can use those in parallel. Webpack is similar to Browserify. And you have a module loader polyfill, which is kind of like its own module library, and that one works with ECMAScript 6 modules. Then there are shims. That's a library that brings you functionality, or brings you most of the functionality of the ECMAScript 6 standard library to ECMAScript 5. And yeah, and then you get stuff like, well, as I said, strings and starts with, and the array methods and all of that, and you can use it in ECMAScript 5. And as soon as ECMAScript 6 is mainstream, stuff still works, and you don't need the library anymore. So that's nice. You're already writing future code right now. Let's conclude. What are the takeaways? Many features are already in engines now. But even independently of that, you can already use it today by just compiling it to ECMAScript 5, and there are several really good solutions out there. The biggest impact on the community, I think, and this is kind of surprising, is because these are boring features. These are not that exciting. You can have classes and modules. These you can easily have via libraries because JavaScript syntax is so flexible. It's easy to get those via libraries. But it's very important to have those standardized. And at the moment, if you use even class or constructor-related or inheritance-related code in the different frameworks, very often is not compatible, which sucks. Because then you write your code in one framework, then you switch to a new framework, and then you have to rewrite your code. And then with modules, you have the competing module standards, and again, the JavaScript community is fragmented. So ECMAScript 6 will do away with this fragmentation, and that's a boring feature, but an important feature of ECMAScript 6. So thanks. There is a blog post where I give like a more thorough overview of ECMAScript 6 and where you can look up some of the details. And my book is actually available free online, so you can check it out. And this is about ECMAScript 5. And yes, thank you.
Yes, hello. My question is, now that we are going to see features of ECMAScript 6 appearing in browsers, would you ask the browser, are you speaking ECMAScript 6, or are you using Modernizer or something like that to detect features?
That's a very good question, because the way you do it right now, the term polyfill means that you have a library that kind of gives you a feature from the future or a modern feature in an older browser. And the way those work usually is, well, I think at the very beginning you check the version of the browser. And now they just check, is there a constructor for feature X? And if the constructor for feature X is not available, is not a global variable, or is not, doesn't exist, then I have to implement it myself. For ECMAScript 6, it'll be very interesting. I think there'll be two approaches. Either you'd say, well, you check for a specific feature. Is it there? You could maybe even use eval, and if it throws an exception for the syntax, you would, well, anyhow, forget that. So then I said that. No, with syntax, you can't do that via library. You will be in the future with macros, though. So you'd check for specific features. and then, or no, but I think more probable is probably you have two versions of the module, and then you deliver the compiled ECMAScript 5 version to all the browsers and the purely ECMAScript 6 version to browsers that have complete support for ECMAScript 6. And this kind of conditional support for features is probably mostly interesting for the standard library. That's where it makes sense, where you check for single features. And so, for example, if string.prototype.repeat doesn't exist, I add it to the prototype. Yeah, all right, figured it out in the end. Right.
Hi, Alex.
Yeah.
So as someone who's been using ES6 and ES5 in production for a while, it's really convenient. All the new stuff that you get is really good.
So you're talking about, yeah, so you have used it.
Yes.
Cool.
But one of the biggest problems when you're using it for the browser is it's really, really slow. Most of the new features, if you do a JSPerf, which is one of the first things we like to do when you're doing browser stuff, it's incredible how even ES5 stuff is slow today. 2 days ago, underscore switched a lot of array methods back to just for loops instead of using native method. I mean, it's been a couple of years now that we've had ES5. These are not ES6.
So that is interesting, by the way, is this library underscore JS that I mentioned before. They're doing stuff that is built into ECMAScript at the moment. And if you write for each on some engines, I don't know if on all, on some engines, writing the code yourself is faster than using the built-in for each, because that jumps into C++. And making the jump into a different environment, that's a speed problem. Same with the DOM. I mean, the DOM is so slow because there's a barrier. You go from JavaScript into C++, and then you have conversions and stuff. So that is fascinating. I found that fascinating.
I would just like to add a point that I've used the same kind of code on server side as well, but it's generally around database calls and network calls, which are much, much slower, so it doesn't really matter. But when on the browser, these are really slow. These things matter. They hamper the performance, the frame rate. ES5 and 6 are really great, but they are maybe not ready yet. As much we want to believe they're ready, but they're just slow.
Okay, just let me ask you a question. Is it so it was so slow that it actually caused you problems in production? So you ran the code and it was too slow for animation, you say?
So if you have an app that deals with a lot of data on the client side, and we process that data a lot, we do a lot of manipulation on the data. And we used a lot of underscore Lodash kind of functions. And we had to revert eventually to not use functions, but make for loops to make sure that, or at least do small functions that the browser could inline them.
Yeah. Well, if you scale that stuff, and if I imagine that some of the things they created intermediate, say arrays and things, and those may get better with iterators, by the way, the performance of that. But what I'm usually seeing is that people discover some kind of feature, do a JSPerf test, and then get like all excited and like scared. And they measure performance like too early and try to optimize too early, but obviously you actually had problems in production. And then you may have to look at the algorithm or just do things differently in general. But I don't think that's really an ECMAScript 5 problem. It's more like, do you generate intermediate data structures and that kind of thing? When it comes to compiling ECMAScript 6 to ECMAScript 5, I distinguish if you, for example, arrow functions, if you look at and Tresor has, and I link to it from this blog post, Tresor has an interactive kind of a command line where you input ECMAScript 6 code, and then you see on the other side, you see the ECMAScript 5 code that it's compiled to. And if you use arrow functions, you see that it's just compiled to our normal function. So unless you use this inside, then it does that equals this above it, which is really cool. That like figures it out, puts it on top. So for many features, what Tresor produces is a lot like handwritten code. Other features like generators, they are, and with generators you have to be very clever to do that well, and they're compiled into a state machine. And that's like major voodoo, and I'd expect that to be much slower than native generators. So you have to test feature by feature, but in general, I'd expect Tresur to do pretty well speed-wise.
Okay, I have a question regarding the regarding the similarity to CoffeeScript. So I use a lot of CoffeeScript in my day-to-day work, but I had never looked into ECMAScript 6 before. Now, listening to your presentation, I see a lot of things that are very similar, if not identical, to CoffeeScript. So maybe you can elaborate a little on that.
Okay, looking at the guy with the camera, that I don't like. Can I move back and forth, or should I stay here? I will stay here. And interestingly, CoffeeScript is very controversial. Some people just love it, other people really hate it. And from me, from someone who doesn't like CoffeeScript as much, for me, ECMAScript 6 is kind of the new CoffeeScript. I think CoffeeScript people would not agree with that. But that's what it is. That's what it is for me. And what is true for sure is that CoffeeScript has been very influential, because a lot of the features like the arrow functions, they were tested out in the real world via CoffeeScript. And a lot of like things that worked, they come from CoffeeScript, and they worked in CoffeeScript, and that's why they are now in ECMAScript 6. So and some people just really don't like JavaScript syntax, and if you like the white spacey CoffeeScript syntax, I think you'll continue to use CoffeeScript. Otherwise, I suggest switch to ECMAScript 6.
Okay, first, thanks for the talk. And I don't know, it's a little bit annoying for me because I wanted to ask so many questions during your talk, and now I forgot all of them. So maybe one that summarizes a few of them is I actually have an issue with a lot of stuff in ES6.
All right.
And one of the things is JavaScript is great because it's so flexible, right? You can create closures, you can create whole applications using closures, or you can go the object-oriented way, do prototyping. But the problem is, this is kind of screaming for style guides, right? Because some people just do it wrong, and you can do it wrong.
Oh yeah, lots of styles to program in. So you can program JavaScript like Java. You can program it like Smalltalk. You can program it like lots of other, lots of styles.
And my issue a little bit is with all the new features being 90% syntactical sugar, or let's say a little bit less maybe. The need for a style guide is much, much higher.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, you can do it even more wrong now.
Yeah.
And this is kind of the thing I have problems with the ES6. Not only that, but also these controversials. Like, there is this parallel approach of abstraction by object-oriented way or abstraction by functional way. So you can abstract your logic in your code using functional abstraction.
Yeah.
Or you can do it via prototypes or syntactical sugar classes. But my problem is a little bit, now they have driven both directions a little bit forward by providing lambda and by providing a syntactical sugar for classes. So now it's even harder to have a standard what way to go. Should I write my application in a functional way, or should I write my application in a prototypal object-oriented way?
Oh yeah. But it gives you more power, it gives you more responsibility, to quote Spider-Man. But the thing is, I like that, and for me, it's never been. The different styles are going to be a problem for sure, but there are tools for checking style, for making sure, like in a project, you want to adhere to a single style. And as I said, like there's some styles are out there that I have a really hard time to understand, And if you are in a team, you probably want to define a style and then stick with that. And then you have tools that you can actually run that tell you, well, you just didn't do it properly. And that means that your code base won't have style inconsistencies. And for my own personal style, I've developed a certain kind of taste. And for me, the functional part of JavaScript never clashes with the object-oriented part. And actually, Java is a language where they try to be like not functional at all. And that kind of, when it comes to eventlessness and that, they then very clumsily introduced inner classes, where actual functions would have been, callbacks would have been a much better choice. And the language that gets it right syntactically in many ways and also conceptually is Smalltalk. And that's a very, very object-oriented language, but it has a very functional feature inside, and that's lambdas. They call them blocks. So for me personally, with my style, I'm so happy. JavaScript makes me so happy because I have both kind of weapons at my disposal. And the styles, that's a problem with any flexible language. And JavaScript is now, I don't think there are too many features because you're kind of closing the gap between JavaScript and Haskell. A lot of the features you see now, Haskell already had for years, if not decades.
Thank you very much, Alex.
Yeah.